Hello and welcome back to part 3 of my favourite Thomas and Friends episodes. We have previously ranked good and great episodes in part 1 and really great / super great episodes in the previous video, which was part 2. But now we're going to do the best of the best. These are my 6 favourite episodes of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. And we're going to start with something I have grown to appreciate more so as I've heard other people talking about why they like this episode over the past 3 years. We're going to talk about the season 4 episode Fish, which is actually a Railway Series episode story from Book 27, Really Useful Engines. Some people might not know that. So, this is another one of those episodes, kind of day in the life at the harbour. And I believe it is supposed to be the same harbour from Thomas Percy and the Post Train, which we will be ranking soon, and also the same harbour from All at Sea, stuff like that. Although it's a little bit difficult to tell in some of the shots, and the Thomas and Friends wiki kind of picks apart different aspects of the different harbours. I personally like to think that this is the Knapford Harbour, which is the same from the Flying Kipper, which we will also be ranking in the best of the best, which is different from the Brendam Harbour, which is from Howard Lorry, which we will also be ranking in this episode, which is also the same harbour from the World's Strongest Engine, which we ranked in part 1 of this tier list series, which is the same harbour as the one from Thomas Percy and the Dragon, which we also ranked in part 1. So you can see that a lot of my favourite episodes had scenes with the harbour, just like how Thomas and the Jet Engine and the Diesel had scenes at Brendam Harbour. So you're noticing a trend. I really like the harbour scenes and the Brendam dock scenes in Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends episodes. And as a result, I really like this. I also really like episodes with the Flying Kipper, which is why the Flying Kipper will also be ranked. I'm ranking Fish right now, and we previously ranked Something in the Air from part 1. So if you want to hear my thoughts about any of these episodes that we previously ranked, go watch part 1 and part 2 of this tier list series. But with Fish, we get an interaction between Thomas and Duck about the concept of fish getting stuck in an engine's boiler and it causing trouble, which is a reference to Thomas Goes Fishing from season 1. And they really like to let everybody know that fish are very smelly, and not all of the engines like that smell, particularly Thomas. Thomas does not like the smell of fish. And so one night there's a special order, and it's so big that the Fat Controller decided to add extra goods vans to the train that the railwaymen call the Flying Kipper. And we get a lot of scenes of engines moving around. Thomas pulls by with the post train, and there's engines scattered all throughout, waiting to take their trains away. And a really good technique that David Mitton used in this episode is when the engines are not the focus of the shot, they have them looking away from the camera. So you see James in one scene, he's looking away from the camera because he's not the focus of the shot. Thomas pulling by with the post train is the focus of the shot. So you see Thomas's face, but you don't see James's face. And when Henry steams out of the harbour, pulling the flying kipper, they have this really epic low angle of Henry pulling out. So you see the wheels of Henry, and you also see the wheels of the goods vans that the fish is being transported in. And so Duck is sent to Wellsworth Station at the top of Edward's branch line to be a backing engine to help Henry get up the hill, which actually does more damage than good later in the episode. So Henry gives a special signal to Duck. Duck is not coupled to the back of the train, which allows Henry to run on without stopping until they reach the top of the hill, where Henry will need Duck the most. So they're going up the hill, and at the brake van at the back of the train, it loses the tail lamp. So Duck feels the weight on his buffers slacking, and he doesn't see the tail lamp. So when Henry feels his train getting heavier, he slows down, and then Duck crashes into the back of his train. The episode kind of ends abruptly because they end on a punchline about Duck telling the Fat Controller, "Thomas told me to be careful. The fish got me in a right pickle, didn't they?" It's a really abrupt ending to the episode, and I really don't like that. But there's so much good cinematography. I think it's the best cinematography of any season 4 episode. And kind of like with Thomas Percy and the Dragon, there's just really good cinematography in this episode. Because it plays around with the different angles. It plays around with the concept of engines being physical, heavy-duty machinery, rather than just a bunch of silly talking trains, which Hit Entertainment and Mattel reduced them to being with the failure of Thomas and the Magic Railroad. So I've gone on enough about this episode. It is a masterpiece. The next episode we're going to rank is Thomas Percy and the Post Train, which was called Thomas Percy and the Mail Train in the US. So this wasn't a Railway Series story to my knowledge. I don't believe. So it was, and I'm not sure if it was from a magazine story or not. Anyone who does know, please let me know in the comments down below. So they have a montage of how Thomas and Percy are the post train engines, and one night the mail boat from the mainland is late, so Percy is blamed for the mail being late coming into the post office. So the Postmaster General blames the Fat Controller for the delay, and Harold the helicopter threatens to take away the post train and deliver the mail himself, which gets which gets Percy mad. And then there's this really funny scene halfway through the episode where Thomas lets Percy know that the Fat Controller got blamed for a boat in the middle of the channel between Barrow in Furness and the island of Sodor. And so they say that tonight will just have to be quicker than ever before. And then Harold just comes in, a touchdown out of nowhere, and says, "Hey there, you two, there's news flying about all over the place. They're gonna scrap the post train and use me instead. Wings work wonders, you know, always." And so I love the way that Thomas just defiantly says, "Rubbish!" after Harold flies away. Just a touchdown for 10 seconds to brag that he's going to steal the engine's jobs, which I'm not sure that that Harold can transport as much mail as the four coaches' vans that Thomas and Percy transport the mail in. I'm not sure that's logistically possible. I think that's just the ego of Harold. And so they have a lot of really good montages in this episode. And then Thomas comes to a station and there's a man who missed his train home. So Thomas's driver offers to give him a ride to the next station so that he can go home. And then the episode ends of the Fat Controller reading Thomas and Percy a letter from the man who missed his train home, who cares to say that the post train is the pride of the line, which is almost true, because without the post train, the delivery of mail across Sodor would be slowed down significantly, because Harold is incapable of doing the job on his own like he does in season 6 and some episodes after season 6. So I just really like this episode. I really like the dynamic that Thomas and Percy have between Harold. And there's this scene where Percy comes back really tired. Duck is in the shed for some reason, and he says, or he makes note that Percy is up and bright early when, and then Percy says that, no, you're wrong, I'm back, tired and late. And then the narrator says, and then Percy fell asleep almost before his buffers touched the bar. I just think that's a really sweet scene, because much like some of the other Percy episodes on this list, it really emphasizes that Percy is a hard worker. And even though I'm not really a big fan of Percy the Small Engine as a character, the thing I admire about him most is that the Fat Controller just gives him odd jobs, and he does it without complaining to the Fat Controller. Yes, he might complain to the other engines, but he would never complain to the Fat Controller, because he went from a station pilot to doing odd jobs like rebuilding the harbour at the end of Thomas's branch line, which became the Knapford Harbour, which is a kind of a weird thing, because in the Railway series a lot of the scenes at Knapford Harbour was actually Tidmouth Harbour. There's weird continuity between the TV series map and the Railway series map that Audrey illustrated. It's and I prefer not to go into this video, but yeah, those are my thoughts. The next episode this is a fan favourite. Some might say it's the best episode of season 5, Horrid Laurie. I grew up with the Take Long Laurie one, and I had no idea where he came from until years later when I watched this episode on YouTube, and it was like, oh my god, this is one of the best episodes of all time, and it's the first appearance of a Butch the Tow Truck, which we have noted in previous tier lists, but he didn't have a face. And so the Lauries come to the island to try and replace the engine's jobs anyway, but they're just three lorries compared to a whole fleet of engines, which doesn't make sense. But they want the engine's jobs, and there are some aspects where they do take the engine's jobs, and Laurie 3 is probably the most impactful, because there's a scene where Toby is not needed at the quarry, because I believe it's Laurie 2 who has done his job. And so he goes to the flour mill to see if there's any flour he can transport, but Laurie 3 has done his job. And the way they have it shot is that Laurie 3 is convincing some of the industries on the Farquhar branch line that the lorries are better equipped to do their jobs. And I've seen interesting theories about why Thomas doesn't appear in this episode as much as Toby. And one of the theories is that Thomas sabotaged the lorries to fail, which I don't know how Thomas could set up one of the best stunts in the TV series of Lorry 2 falling off the cliff and the driver getting knocked out of the cab and getting getting one of those cartoon concussions with the big ginormous, almost Pinocchio nose sized bump on his head, and then the wrecked lorry was taken to the docks afterwards. And then Toby says, Not very useful now, are you?" And then Percy also says, "Well, who's this lump of steaming scrap iron?" Because the horrid lorries insult the engines at the start of the episode, and then the other engines can insult the lorries back. And then when all of the wrecked lorries are together before they're being shipped out, Thomas says, well, 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 the Brothers Grimm smashed, broken, and sunk because Lorry 2 falls off a cliff, Lorry 3 breaks down at a level crossing because I guess his gross load limit was exceeded by transporting too much flour from the flour mill, so he had a broken axle, and stupid Lorry backed into the sea, said the tow truck man, because you see Butch the tow truck towing Lorry 1 into the docks where the other two lorries are. And so I believe Lorry 1 is sunk, Lorry 2 is smashed, and Lorry 3 is broken in the Brothers Grimm smashed, broken, and sunk. And so I really like the dynamic because it's not a diesel, it's a road vehicle. I mean, we've had threats like George the Steamroller, who threatens to get rid of the railways, but George doesn't try to take away from Sir Handel's job in Steamroller because he's not equipped to do so. However, these lorries pose a tangible threat to the railway, and it's interesting that most of the damage seems to be done on Thomas's branch line, which leads people to believe that Thomas set up the lorries to fail, because many theorize this episode could have been taken place in the beaching cuts of British railways, and I kind of like that theory too, even though I don't necessarily agree with the theory that Thomas set up all the lorries to fail. But he might have paid a Butch off, because when you see Lorry 2 crashing off the cliff, a Butch is going up that steep hill the other direction, so maybe he might have leaked oil onto the road to cause Lorry to spin out and fall off. I mean, there's a lot of different theories you could have about the way that the lorries met their demise, but they produced some of the best merchandise because we don't really get a whole lot of trucks and lorries besides Elizabeth or the Crosby Station cargo truck or the scrap lorry in different merchandise. Very few and far in between. The next episode is my favourite episode from which season? My favourite episode from season 1, The Flying Kipper. Everyone loves this episode. Everyone loves the crash. Everyone loves the montage of Henry steaming through steaming on the main line. Everyone loves the opening when we get the introduction to what the Flying Kipper is. Everyone loves the snow aesthetic. Everyone loves the sunrise cinematography with the sun rising in the background, and the way that Henry gets damaged, which results in him getting a new shape at the end of the episode, and it relieves all of the problems of Henry needing the special Welsh coal that he got earlier on in season 1. And this is a product of a lot of a lot of jokes in the community with memes and YouTube poops, but it's because everyone loves this episode so much. And it's by far the best episode of season 1. Everyone I talk to almost unanimously agree that it's the best episode of season 1, and a lot of people say it's their favourite episode of the entire TV series. But it's not mine, because I put 2 episodes in front of it. And the next one is my favourite episode of season 5, which is, in my opinion, the best Halloween episode, Stepney Gets Lost. This is a fantastic episode! I freaking love this episode! It is a fantastic Stepney episode. It is a fantastic introduction to the 2 Diesels. And I'm going to get into a little bit of a headcanon with the way that Ari and Bert are portrayed in this episode. It's got that really spooky atmosphere. It's got the good interactions between Stepney and Toby and Mavis. It's got the good kind of backstory character relationship between Stepney and Rusty, which have your thoughts about in the comments, whether you like or hate Rusty to the rescue, which we talked about in part 1 of this tier list. And the way that Stepney almost dies, because Stepney is lost finding his way home from the quarry after he delivers rock and stone to a new branch line, which I'm not sure which branch line that is. And I've only recently pieced together that Stepney probably goes down the main line after coming out of the quarry, and he turns onto the Peel Godred branch line, because he goes under the same bridge that Henry goes under in Haunted Henry, which we know is on the Peel Godred branch line. So I did recently piece that together after not knowing for several years, because the tracks are almost entirely new sets. It's the first appearance of the Scrapyard, and it's got some of the best spooky music that you'll ever hear in a Thomas and Friends episode. And the way that the Fat Controller steps in after the grabber nearly grabs Stepney after Ari and Bert took Stepney to the smelter's shed. And I'm going to get into a little bit of a headcanon here. I personally like to believe that when the narrator, either Michael Angelis or Alec Baldwin, yes, the Alec Baldwin, says Stepney was all alone, but not for long, 2 Diesels approached. With the way that Ari and Bert are in kind of this grimy, dirty condition, compared to the more clean condition they're in come season 6 episodes like the Middle Engine, where you get those interactions between Ari and Bert with Percy and James, because they're the piggies in the middle, as Ari and Bert dubbed them. With the way that their paint looks very different, because Ari and Bert were repainted into Splatter and Dodge for Thomas and the Magic Railroad, and Tidbit in Calling All Engines, you can see the purple paint underneath them, which is just really interesting. If you get high definition footage, you can see that, which is really cool. Little tidbit. I personally like to believe that the way that the 2 Diesels who are approached were originally described on the Thomas website as the Grim Messengers of Doom, in my head canon, since the Class 08 shunter from British Railways was the most ubiquitous diesel ever made in England. I like to believe that the two Diesels are actually different characters from Ally and Bert, who we see in season 6, because this is the only episode where Ally and Bert ever threaten to scrap an engine. After that, they become kind of more pranksters on the railway, because as the series got dumbed down after Thomas and the Magic Railroad. So that's my headcanon. I like to believe that the grim messengers of doom who try to scrap Stepney are different characters from Ally and Bert, and it's easy for me to say that because the Diesels who approached were never named in this episode, and it is my favourite Halloween episode of the TV series. But my favourite episode of all time is Gallant Old Engine. Without the effort of Rheneas to pull his train home, there would be no Skarloey Railway. And back in these days in the Railway series, the only two employees on the Skarloey Railway were Rheneas's driver and fireman, who was also the owner and the assistant of the whole railway. It was just these two guys working the whole railway. And they had to overcome Rheneas's mechanical faults of his valve gear getting jammed, and it being bad weather, and the train being heavy, to convince Rheneas to pull his train home. And the way that Skarloey explains it to Duncan after Duncan wouldn't stop grumbling. He complained about... He complained he wasn't polished enough. He complained he was overworked. Most of all, he complained about the passengers. The way that they set up that to explain a kind of a prequel story to the Skarloey Railway episodes we all know and love is just a really good... I think it's the best example of a character telling other characters a story to teach them a lesson to be a really useful engine. We get the amazing music of the Storm theme. We get the amazing scenery of the Skarloey Railway on an overcast day. We get the really good morality. It's the first appearance of Rheneas since, I think, A Bad Day for Sir Handel, which was kind of a precursor to Four Little Engines, because we were told that Rheneas was sent away to be mended at the start of season 4, and then in this episode, Rheneas comes home, and you have that really sweet moment of how Rheneas is glad that he's come home, and it really emphasizes how important Rheneas's train was to saving the Skarloey Railway. And in my opinion, not only wouldn't the Skarloey Railway had survived if Rheneas didn't pull his train home, but also it's by far the most important train in the history of the Skarloey Railway. And I grew up watching this episode somehow. I think it was on TV once, and then years later I went onto YouTube and watched it, and I was like, oh my god, this is the greatest episode I've ever seen. And the more I hear people talking about it, particularly in the context of the Railway series, the more I love this episode. Because I've always loved episodes like Stepney Gets Lost and The Flying Kipper. But I've grown much more appreciation for Gallant Old Engine. Even though it is my favourite episode, I grow more appreciation for it as I hear other people talking about it, and that's something I cannot say about any other episode. So it is my favourite episode in the entire history of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends, the TV series. So these are my rankings. These are my top 26 episodes of all time. I'd love to know your thoughts about my entire rankings. Are there episodes you think belong on here? Are there episodes you don't think belong on here? because we all have our different opinions about the TV series, and we all have our personal rankings. So I would love to hear them down below. Anyway, thank you for watching all 3 parts of this tier list. The next video will be a Thomas Wooden Railway layout video that I filmed at the time of uploading this video 3 months ago. So look forward to that, and then after we do that layout video, I'm going to try do some Thomas Wooden Railway discussion reviews. So look forward to all of that. I'm going to tweet this on Twitter, X, at the time of uploading this episode. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.